Greetings, I'm Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this 72nd scale DUKW from Italeri. Is that how it's meant to be said? It seems kind of clunky to say DUKW. It's a DUKW, or maybe just duck. Quack. This is basically a truck boat, or a boat truck, so when it's built I will test if it floats. It's very important that we find that out. Comment now what you think the result will be. There are markings for 4 versions of the DUKW, and the back of the box shows them. You might also notice that the box says 2024, but the decals are really the only thing that makes that true. It's still a tooling from 2004. It's still not too bad though, and it's not like they're trying to be deceptive or anything. It is also worth noting, though it doesn't really seem to mention it on the box, that this can be built as a wargaming version if you want. I didn't, but you can. Inside the box you'll find 2 sprues moulded in a sort of olive colour. These are fairly neatly moulded. There are mould lines of course, you'd be a fool to expect no mould lines, but they're not too bad. Preparation shouldn't be too time consuming. I did notice that one of the hull sides has what looks to be scrape marks in it. It shows up quite clearly on camera, but is barely noticeable in person. There's some fairly good detail here. I certainly don't think this is going to appeal to rivet counters, I don't know what would, but this isn't too bad. I'm no DUKW expert, but I'm pretty confident the result is going to be a reasonable representation of a DUKW. You may notice there are 2 sets of wheels in this kit, and that's pretty much the difference between the normal display version and the wargaming version. Greatly simplified running gear and the omission of a couple of more breakable details. Here's the decal sheet. There sure is a lot of stars. Common stars, and different stars for the 4 marking options. Very good. There is also a bit of clear plastic. You were meant to cut this out for windshields, which I didn't do. And finally, instructions. These are the fold-out kind that I find mildly irritating, but in this case, there isn't too much to the build, so they don't really get too out of hand. I just like to complain. The instructions themselves are easy enough to read and follow. They make sense, and, sensibly, the instructions for the wargaming version are separate, which eliminates potential confusion. Maybe not everybody's as easy to confuse as old Herbert, but it's gonna help somebody. Like old Herbert. You can see the painting and marking suggestions are here on the last pages, as well as the back of the box. Very good. Time to glue some bits of plastic together. First up, the hull top, into which this inner doodad goes. Because it's on the inside, you obviously have to do this before assembling the rest of the hull. I then add the hull sides. This isn't too difficult, there are little guide tabs there to help you get everything lined up right. I would suggest doing this in stages. I glued the front first, then the middle and rear. You will probably have to hold the part while it bonds, so doing it in stages just makes that a bit easier. It looks like a pretty solid hull. Surely this will float. Once the lower hull is together, I surprisingly add the upper hull. You may find you need to apply a bit of pressure to get this all the way together, but it's nothing too challenging. Time for some cab or cockpit details, like these little gear shifty things. The set of 2 smaller ones goes on the right, and this set of slightly taller ones goes into that left opening. This is certainly something tweezers will help with. Tweezers are our friend. I follow that with the seat backs. This is not hard to position, though I did find myself bumping it out of place quite a few times, so probably try to avoid that. This front doobly what's-it is next. I guess this is a boarding ramp or something. To get something close to the correct angle, I referenced the back of the box. I then attach the support bits. I'm sure they've got a very important technical name, like Trevor or something. If you don't dilly-dally, there should still be time to move the main flappy bit to get these to fit properly, if you do need to nudge things about. And again, tweezers will be helpful here. The wargaming version doesn't include this. It looks interesting though, so I think it's worth it. The windshield and surrounding areas assembly was kind of annoying. Maybe I just went about it the hard way. I glued this side bit on, and it was kind of hard to tell if that's how it should go on, but that's how I put it. Then I add the dashboard part. I figured it was probably easier to put this on now rather than later. I've got it up against the right side part just to be sure it won't interfere with the left side. I attached that assembly to the hull. I found I had to do a bit of trimming to get it to fit properly without a gap along the bottom. I also applied pressure while being careful not to break the windshield part. It does feel kind of delicate. Then the left side thing goes on, which also needed some pressure. It's not perfect, but it is on. Next, why not add the steering wheel? There's a hole in the floor the shaft should sit in, and then it gets pressed up between the two nubbins on the underside of the dashboard. And then, side windows. These were a bit fiddly and annoying to get into place. They've got a slight cutout on one long edge, which does seem to help get them into place, but it was still a bit annoying. The right one ended up looking a bit better than the left one, but I didn't film that. I feel like these are a weak part of the model. Anyway, I then turn my attention to the rear deck, where I add a spare wheel. The guide pins make this very easy. Next to that, I add the winch. This is also shaped such that it should be pretty hard to install it wrong. I follow this by adding rear lights. These weren't the best looking parts, even though I did clean them up as best I could. I got the first one in place alright, but then the not entirely unexpected happened. The left one went flying right into the gullet of the carpet monster. That bastard. This is the problem with handling rounded parts in tweezers. I was disappointed, but I did, after finishing the model, find the missing light. So, in the end, you'll see the model with that in place. It's kind of a surprise happy ending, which I've ruined. Moving right along, there are some jerry cans that go on the rear deck here. I had trouble getting them to sit next to each other with my fat fingers, but that's what tweezers are for. Now it's time for the running gear. I've chosen to build the non-wargaming version, which means there's a few bits to go together for the axles and suspension and such. There's not a lot to guide the leaf springs onto the axle here, but with enough kajiggering you can see where they're supposed to sit together. I didn't wait too long before installing that on the hull, because if the parts aren't totally bonded, they can easily be nudged into the correct position if they do need to be nudged. It's not especially complicated, but I assume the wargaming version is a lot easier. Next, I add the front wheels. These are slightly different to the rear wheels, so don't get them mixed up. Otherwise, the DUKW Wheel Association will have to send you a nasty letter, and you won't like that. The rear axle assembly is slightly different. There are obviously two axles, and the leaf spring doodaddery can just be slid over the axles. All you've got to do is make sure everything's the right way up. I decided it was a good idea to leave the side parts loose, then place the entire lot on the hull and kajigger them into position, rather than gluing it all together, trying to get it aligned, and then putting it on the hull. I figured it would save a bit of time, only having to position the parts once. There's keying on the hull to make this quite easy. Then the rear wheels go on in pretty much the same way as the front ones did. You may have to do a bit of nudging, but the fit is pretty good. The only thing I didn't really like about these wheels is they have a hollow back. The wargaming wheels do have a more open-backed design, so I guess that's different, and it's not really important, but with all of that suspension detail, it would have been nice if the wheels were a little bit more complete. The wheels probably won't propel the DUKW through the water, so it needs a propeller. I glue that onto the shaft, which is quite easy, though you will have to make sure it's not sitting at some wibbly-wobbly angle. While that bonds, I add this towing hitch just below the winch here. Then, I install the propeller. There's a hole in there somewhere above the axles for the shaft to mount into, and the retaining doodad moulded on the propeller end of the shaft should line up with that support bracket on the hull. You may find tweezers to be helpful here. Next I assemble the wall thing for the open section of the hull. There is keying here, but it's not very strong. The way I did this was to glue one corner together, the front right, let it bond for a bit, then glue the front left corner together and let that bond as well. That way, they won't just come apart when I try to put that assembly into the hull. Once that's ready, I slot the rear wall into place. This seems like it will almost stay where you want it with friction alone, but it won't. I then gently put the rest of the wall assembly into place. It did take a bit of pressure, but everything should go into position easily. To make sure that it stays there, I add glue. Oh wow! Revolutionary! The result does look a little bit weird, kinda wrong, at least to me. Just the way the wall slopes down toward the front and doesn't line up with the side of the hull. I assume that's just because of how the DUKW would sit in the water. Now it's time for more detaily bits, like these rope bumper things. They've probably also got a technical name, like Jeff or Randall. These ones are for the rear. There are end parts that should be glued on, but it wasn't really clear which way around they should go, so I probably did it wrong. When I put them on the hull, they didn't quite look right. I did a bunch of nudging and kajiggering, so they did end up looking okay, but still a bit less satisfying than I wanted. The front is a similar story. There's a central part that goes in the center of the hull, which does kind of help you figure out where the bumpers should sit on either side. The bumpers don't quite conform to the shape of the hull, so I figured the way to do it was to glue them on in steps. I glued the front half on and lined it up with the center bit, then when it was bonded, I glued the rear bit with the loose ropes into place. I follow that with the front lights. Both of these have brush guards molded on, and they're different parts, so don't mix them up, otherwise you'll be in a lot of trouble. These parts do look better than those on the rear, but they are still small and therefore fiddly. The final detail is side mirrors. These are also small and fiddly, but because there isn't much around their mounting point, I was able to position them with my fingers. A bit of nudging so they look like they're being used, and they're on. They do look like they would be kind of easy to break off though, so don't do that. Now the DUKW is ready for the important, highly scientific testing to determine its buoyancy. It sat in the sink for about 5 minutes, every second of which was absolutely thrilling, but I sped it up anyway. As you can see, it is a bit rear heavy, but not enough to pull the top of the hull under the water, so it floats. Now that the very serious, groundbreaking science has been done, the 72nd scale DUKW 2.5 ton GMC truck amphibious version from Italeri, the non-wargaming version, is complete. You'll notice it now has the left rear light in place, pulled from the gaping maw of the carpet monster by brave warriors. You mean you saw it on the floor and picked it up? Well, yeah, but it's nice not to lose something, so I'm pretty happy with that, and with how the kit has turned out. I'm sure there are better, more detailed models of the DUKW available, and I don't think many people have super high expectations of an Italeri kit, which is fair, but it is still pretty decent. The detailing is good for this scale. Most of the parts were molded very nicely, though some of the smaller parts were a bit flashy, which made them kind of annoying to clean up. I do like that there's a simplified version for wargaming. You would probably save a fair bit of time putting it together, and with less of the small details, it would be much less prone to damage while being played with. It was, for the most part, a fun build, and a relatively quick one. I spent about 3.5 hours on stream, which obviously also includes a lot of faffing about, so this would be a nice quick afternoon project. I did find some of the fiddly parts, particularly the windshield area and the corner bumper things, to be a bit annoying, and losing that rear light, if only temporarily, did put a bit of a damper on things, but overall it wasn't a bad experience. If you were looking for a DUKW, you could certainly do worse. If you've got any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comments section below. How wrong were you in your guess as to whether this would float or not? Let me know. If you'd like to watch me build kits like this one live, I stream modelling a couple of times a week over on Twitch. You can find a link for Twitch in the description. Subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of thing, share the video with anybody you think might find it helpful, and if you really like what I do, consider supporting on Patreon or Ko-fi. Take care of yourselves, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.